Welcome to Sherlock Monthly, everyone. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we are going on our monthly biblioventure through the stories of Sherlock Holmes. Today's episode is The Adventure of the Six Napoleons, and joining me for this episode are a couple friends from the UK, the hosts of the Doings of Doyle podcast, Mark Jones and Paul Chapman. Hello, guys.
Oh, good.
Hi there, nice to see you again.
I am very happy to have you guys join us for this one. I was especially, as Paul has brought all the Napoleona right behind him there.
There's a few of my friends.
This will be fun. Okay, everyone, for 30 weeks in 2023-24, we deduced, deciphered, dissected Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes adventures in a kind of conversational annotation. You can see all those episodes on the Rosenbach's YouTube channel. Now we're continuing the biblioventure in a monthly series. Every month, a distinguished Sherlockian or two joins me to discuss one of the stories in the order they were first published. And we're up to story... This is episode 39. I think it's the 35th story that we've done in them. If you're watching live right now, and especially if you're new to watching the show, welcome. I ask you to please like these videos if you so choose. Subscribe to the Rosenbach's YouTube channel. And if you're watching the recording, same deal. Thanks so much. I hope you subscribe and like as well. The live chat field is there for you guys to have fun, which you're already doing. This is so wonderful. Hello, everyone in the chat, Margie and Madeline and Fred and Rini and Claire and Douglas and Vanessa and all of you guys. So I'm so happy to see you guys there. I would also ask you to please consider making a donation to the Rosenbach, especially in these perilous times for arts institutions. You could really help us out, or you could become a member. You can do this at our website, rosenbach.org. Your support helps us continue to create programs like this and also care for our collections. So I'd really appreciate that. Sherlock Monthly is also brought to you by the generous support of Lisa Washington. Thanks so much, Lisa, for continuing to support this show. Well, they've been here before, but I thought I'd still give a little intro for our co-hosts today. Both Mark and Paul are members of the Sherlock Holmes Society of London and the Scandalous Bohemians, a Sherlock Holmes and Conan Doyle society based in the north of England, which holds regular meetings in Leeds and York. Are you both joining us from York? Is that where we are? Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Mark Jones has written widely on Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes, including for the Baker Street Journal, the Serpentine Muse, and Canadian Holmes, is the new commissioning editor of the Sherlock Holmes Journal. His most recent book was Conan Doyle Mystery and Adventure from 2023, which tells the story of the long-lost BBC TV series of Doyle adaptations from the late 60s. Paul Chapman has written widely on Victorian and Edwardian genre literature with a particular focus on Doyle, Bram Stoker, J.S. Le Fanu, and M.R. James. He was a staff writer on Sherlock Magazine for 10 years, edited The Ritual for the Northern Musgraves Sherlock Holmes Society, and he is the author of The Birth of a Legend, Count Dracula, Bram Stoker, and Whitby, which I have a copy and love, has contributed articles and reviews to ACD, the Journal of the Arthur Conan Doyle Society, the Musgrave Papers, All Hallows, Ghosts and Scholars, Wormwood. But both of you were also co-hosts on our subscription-only series, Hound of the Baskervilles. And then Mark was here for Norwood Builder with Ross. And Paul was the co-host for Biblioventures, Monsters and Ghosts, Jekyll and Hyde, and The Picture of Dorian Gray, which we just finished not long ago, which was fabulous. So much fun to have you guys return and to have you back again for this. And it's nice to meet other people who, like me, live in the 19th century.
I wouldn't live anywhere else, Ed.
Yeah. So, with that, if not for the cholera, I really would like to be there. Well, everyone, and what's new with you guys? Any Sherlockian news or anything you've been doing?
We've got a number of projects on the go. We're keeping sort of quiet at the
Yes,
moment.
but we're not going to tell you about it.
Yeah, people will hopefully enjoy them when they appear. But yeah, we're keeping ourselves busy, and obviously the doings of Doyle podcast every month. We're still very busy with that. And next one coming up of that, we're going to be doing The Man from Archangel, one of Doyle's kind of gothic-y short stories.
Oh, good. I don't know if I've read that one yet, so that'll be
Yeah.
fun to do.
Yeah.
Mark, tell me about the becoming the editor for the commissioning editor for the.
Yeah, the commissioning editor. Yes, I joined. So I just started in January. The previous illustrious uh, editor was Roger Johnson, who'd done it for very many years, and he stepped down at the end of last year. So I've taken over. And in fact, my deadline is the end of next week to get all the text over to my co-editor, Heather Owen, who is the production editor. So I only have to worry about the words, and she worries about the pictures and the layouts. But
Tell
it's been
people a
really
little bit
great
about
fun.
tell us a little bit about Sherlock Holmes Journal.
So it's the official journal of the Sherlock Holmes Society of London. It goes out to about 1,000 people twice a year, and it principally covers articles, scholarship, reviews, and things like that. It doesn't print fiction, but it goes into. It's one of the main kind of hallmark journals, I think, for the scholarship, alongside the Baker Street Journal and Canadian Holmes and a few others as well. And I think I'm the fourth person to have done the editorship since the 1950s, which means that people tend to do it for a long time.
Yeah.
So I hope I'm not going to be now stuck here for 20 years doing this. I told Roger I wasn't aiming to beat his record, but they have been rather long-lived, these editors.
Good.
Nicky Hawkin was the editor before Roger.
That's
But it's
wonderful.
a great honor to do it. It's great fun.
I was looking for a copy. Was running out of a copy. I have copies in the other room. So, but that is wonderful. So, all righty. Let's just get started, right? But before we do, Claire Danes, who's I know is in the audience, our Sherlockian poet from New Zealand. She wrote a rhyme for this story, as she's been doing for all the stories. And here it is. Sing a song of 6 busts, a pocket full of why. 5 break-ins, 1 murder, and 1 condemned to die. When the busts were broken, appeared a priceless thing. What a crushing end for all those statues of a king. There you go. Well done, Claire.
Very good.
Thank you. I always love those. Ever broken one of those? Have you ever broken a stat? Have you ever been tempted to break one of your statues just to? No.
No, even if there's a pearl in them, they stay as they are.
That's it. All righty. Well, the 6 Napoleons was actually what was the 8th and really the last story that Doyle had contracted for this run. He had contracted 8 stories, and that was going to be it, and finished it. And then they were, well, we want more, obviously, and I think he knew they were going to ask for more. And then he agreed to 12, which becomes 13. Then he writes an extra one, Second Stain, I think. Then he winds up writing an extra one. So, but at least in this run of stories, he had gone through these and kind of, not that he was figuring it was going to be over in the end of them, but he was finishing up a batch, and this was the one. The manuscript does exist, but it's in the Huntington Library. And it's really hard to see things in the Huntington Library. There was a facsimile edition that the BSI Press put out that's been long out of print. But so it was available at least at one time. Let's see, or if you have the volume on your walls.
Probably do, actually. I don't know if it's might be downstairs.
But yeah, it's a spectacularly great collection at the Huntington, but it's not as easy to see their materials. Although someone told me recently that they were kind of, letting their, kind of relaxing their rules a bit, letting more people come in and see things, which is really nice, which is something we advocate at the Rosenbach. But because I could find no pictures, I don't have that volume from the BSI, so I've never seen the manuscript. And pictures online, zero I found. So, and I was really searching. I thought I could find something from somewhere, but no. So I'm not even sure of the whole provenance and the history of its, how it moved and what became of it and how it even got to the Huntington. But it was first published in Collier's and the Strand. And I always like to look at those before we start. Here's the Collier's with the Frederick Dorr Steele illustrations. And there's always a nice, title piece that they had, illustrated title piece up here. And there were 6 Napoleons. This is their version of it. We'll talk a little bit later about how this kind of doesn't, you take your pick as to what you want your Napoleon bust to look like. But I like that Dorr Steele chose this, younger, long-haired, romantic-looking, Napoleon as his. And also in the initial letter here, it's there you go. I forgot to get a different blow up of this picture, but there's the, as we're told more than once in the story, the ugly Beppo. This is like the criminal that has ever existed, apparently. Everybody looks at the picture and they're like, oh my God, he's so ugly. Yes, maybe, but eye of the beholder and all that.
Yeah.
But there's another couple illustrations I want to see in this later as we get to those parts. And here's the Strand. And the Strand begins with a action illustration to start with. And this one, fortunately, doesn't really give too much away, but it does provide, a nice bit of action to get you. And this is when Holmes is jumping on Beppo when he captures him in the story. Watson and Lestrade behind here. And there hasn't been one since, it's been a couple issues. Solitary Cyclist was with the guy getting shot by, I can't remember who shoots him. Carruthers shoots him. And but then there wasn't one for Milverton, and the Solitary Cyclist before that just had Holmes and Watson seeing the bicycle tire, which is a really good illustration, but it wasn't like an action shot for the readers at the time. And here it is, the Strand Magazine, Return of Sherlock. So let's start the story. Lestrade with it, which is a great opening for this story, guys. With Lestrade here. It was no very unusual thing for Mr. Lestrade of Scotland Yard to look in upon us of an evening, and his visits were welcome to Sherlock Holmes, for they enabled him to keep in touch with all that was going on at the police headquarters. There's a motive we haven't had before. In return for the news which Lestrade would bring, Holmes was always ready to listen with attention to the details of any case upon which the detective was engaged, and was able occasionally, without any active interference, to give some suggestion drawn from his own vast knowledge and experience. There's a little bit of an expansion of the Holmes-Lestrade relationship in this, isn't there?
Yeah, there definitely is. And I think this story is one of those ones where it signals, when we get to the end, it signals a sort of change in dynamic between Holmes and Lestrade. It could, in fact, be inspired by something that happened in real life, which is that one of the police commissioners in Scotland Yard had written something quite favourable about the Sherlock Holmes stories, and that had only just come out a few months before this was probably written. So there may be something there of a little bit of a rapprochement between Sherlock Holmes and the official police force. And you certainly get that sense at the beginning here. There's much more of a comfortable familiarity between Holmes, Watson, and Lestrade.
There's a lovely attitude thing with Lestrade, though, isn't there? Where he's humming and hawing. He's got something on his mind, and he is still at this point uncomfortable about letting Holmes in and feeling embarrassed at having to go to Holmes for advice and oh, this might be something in your line, Mr. Holmes, and it's obvious he's really dying to get some advice. And it's again, it's beautifully written, and Doyle gets the mood.
And when he reveals it, it's not this. Lestrade's not necessarily being meek or anything. He laughs. Then tell me about it. Lestrade laughed, and then he tells him the story. It's like, I'm here to task you something, and like they're really comfortable together. Lestrade's not kind of reluctant to, like he wants Holmes's help, but he doesn't want Holmes's help in all the other stories, right? At the same time, here he seems quite happy to like, all right, I'll bring it up, and because he wants his help.
When was the last time we saw him in this run? Was it Norwood Builder?
I think so. This is the seventh story with him. I have in my notes, and I think there's about 6 more to come. And I think it must have been Norwood Builder. Yeah, because then Stanley Hopkins was a couple.
Yeah,
he's one.
Because Norwood Builder is famously the kind of Lestrade's little cockadoodle-doo of victory. It's the one where it's actually probably the most acrimonious.
Yeah,
as a relationship, and Holmes really feels like he's beaten at one point in that story. So you get a complete reversal by this time. So you have to wonder about why is Conan Doyle moving it on? Which is why I wonder if this little Anderson article is the prompt.
It's just on this particular evening, Lestrade had spoken of the weather in the newspapers. They're smoking cigars. It's like he's just paid a social visit. Like, oh, hello. I mean, now Lestrade has wanted to tell him this, so that's why he's there. But they're able to at least exist in this. We're going to socialize together without Lestrade didn't feel like he had to tell him right off the bat why he was there. And it is, of course, because it's something unusual. An absurd business, trivial, undoubtedly queer. He says Sherlock has a taste for all that is out of the common, but he also thinks that it might be in more Dr. Watson's line than ours. And then ours, he says, then ours, meaning the people that go and catch criminals. Like he's lumping Sherlock in with what he does. And I think that's a unintentional connection here, that we do the same work.
Yeah that gets bookended right at the end as well. So
and there's the Paget illustration for them together here
where he gets out his pocketbook
is here. And Lestrade's here, and Watson's looking really young here.
Yes.
And Holmes, the hairline's really going back here, as it did. I don't know if Sidney's brother's hairline was receding as it was going on, so this is the way he saw him. As his Paget's brother was the original model, and I think over time, when you keep drawing him, I think that his brother must still be in his head, and perhaps his brother's hairline is receding along. It's not like that's a mentioned detail in the story. But I was just struck by Watson. This doesn't look like Watson I remember from the other illustrations. And it doesn't even look like so much like him in, like maybe here. I think Paget's far less consistent with Watson.
Oh yes, far less. Yeah.
That there was never a kind of particular look that he had with the aquiline hawk nose, the gaunt, cheekbones, but also because
he's actually
brother. But
this Watson looks like something from the 1930s.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's I do like that illustration of the three of them together there, and it kind of shows it's the usual client presenting a case to Holmes and Watson, but it's also Lestrade with the note, like he's the one that has the facts, the notes, in a sense, like this is what's going on here, which gives him a kind of authority in a sense in the illustration. Obviously the Holmes loves the trivial, the undoubtedly queer. I was sorry he didn't use outre in this. Lestrade wouldn't use the word outre. That's a word that's appeared in the past, and I mentioned in the past that I think is one of those words that clearly link Doyle with Poe, with Sherlock with Dupin, is that use of the word outre, which does show up in Murders in the Rue Morgue, and which he does, I think, which I think kind of makes that link even clearer. If anybody has questions today too, feel free to put them in the chat. I will do my best to keep an eye on it. I hope I can get a little better at that.
I was just saying, well, I'm just keeping an eye on it as well. Claire has mentioned about Colin Jeavons in the Granada series. And it's worth saying at this point, the Granada series, I think, do the relationship between Holmes, Watson, and Lestrade in this one really very well.
Yeah.
The whole thing is that they are buddies, really. And in fact, going to your point, Paul, about the reveal about, go on, tell me what you've come to tell me about. They do that in a really, really nice way. But throughout the whole episode of the Granada episode, that's a kind of running comedy sequence is between,
Isn't that the one with the humbug?
With the humbug in the stakeout at the end. Yeah, that's right. It's very funny.
And it's very much a three of them. It's a trio through that whole episode. And Watson's we have this moment here where he's asked his opinion about the condition of somebody to do this, which I'll get to in a second. Outside of that, Watson's just standing around, just making his observations, not active in doing anything. And I find it interesting in the Granada series, especially in this episode, several of Sherlock's lines go to Watson.
Transferred. That's right.
So they want to make him, and then what it does is it really makes that kind of union between not just Sherlock and Watson, but also in this episode with Lestrade, kind of really connects them together much better. So, well, madness, a queer madness, a hatred of Napoleon the First. I like that it's Napoleon the First. We get the reminder because 20th century people need a reminder that no, there were other Napoleons after him, but really only one important one. But maybe with the time this story's written, if you say Napoleon, some people might be more inclined to think Napoleon the Third. Who was in charge of France for a while. So, but it's Napoleon the First. And then Lestrade goes right in to tell about the story of the three busts that have been broken. Someone has broken in, and I would just have a field day on your shelf, Paul, if he broke it.
Yes.
Well, no, he wouldn't, because he's looking for one particular one. None of the others matter. So, and Lestrade seems to think it was one of those senseless acts of hooliganism, which I think is the first time that hooliganism has been written in print. But even that word hooligan is very, very new. OED says the word first appears in print in the daily newspaper police court reports in the summer of 1898. That's the earliest written account they've had of the word hooligan. Several accounts of the rise of the word purporting to be based on firsthand evidence attributed to a misunderstanding or perversion of holy or holy's gang, but there's no positive connection with that. The name hooligan featured in a music hall song of the 1890s, which described the doings of a rowdy Irish family, and a comic Irish character of the name appeared in a series of adventures in Funny Folks. But basically, it's disruptive behavior. But I think even for Doyle's time, it still has that hint of the Irish about it, which the word has lost some of that now. Now it's, especially for you guys, it's all about football fans.
It tends to be,
but for in America, it's a kind of like a cute, funny term for, like we don't have it's not a scary word in America usually. It's like, oh, you hooligans. But I think in the time the story's written, there's a not just a class identity, but a nationality identity to that kind of word, hooligans.
And linking in here with, we'll get into this later, and particularly I think in Lestrade's mind, to a form of political violence.
Yeah. And it's the first hint of that kind of thing that we're thinking of it's not just anybody committing some kind of violence. It's a particular kind of violence by immigrants, foreigners, people you don't trust. So that's the first hint of it. Well, Dr. Barnicott is an enthusiastic admirer of Napoleon, and his house is full of books, pictures, and relics of the French emperor, much like Paul here, who even has an ashtray, Napoleonic ashtray he showed me a moment ago. And he
I think as well with that description of Barnicott's house, it's interesting use of that word relics and tying in the cult of Napoleon.
Wait till I talk about relics in a little bit.
Very, very much along those lines.
You're gonna love what I have to say about Napoleon relics. But this is always fascinated me, guys. And for Doyle, but just for people in general, British people in general, who loved and revered Napoleon, who thought of him in this kind of heroic ways. He was the enemy for decades. Now, clearly he was defeated, so you could just say, oh, well, we defeated him anyway. But I think Napoleon is still kind of is still iconic and famous today, but I'm not sure people really connect why he would have been so admired and revered in the 19th century, especially in England.
I think in Britain, really, it is this kind of the defeated foe thing, and admiring him at that level, and also because we weren't occupied by the French during those wars, so we didn't have that memory, and it's that year after the defeat of Waterloo, we're the ones who then put him into exile on one of our islands, and there's almost a sense of ownership about him. He's our kind of our monster, if you like, and this softens over the 19th century, I think, to an admiration of Napoleon, again because he's safely dead as well. You can admire him. The Bonapartism itself hasn't been a great threat. You've had the Second Empire, which under Napoleon III, we came close to war with them in the late 1850s. We'd been allied with them in the mid-1850s for the Crimean War, but there was no real sense of threat to us. And I think as well with Napoleon III, with the Second Empire, the Carnival Empire, there's a sense of opera bouffe about that. It's never as threatening as the original one. So Bonapartism itself, in a political sense, is a kind of, it becomes a spent force in particular after the death of the Prince Imperial, who would have been Napoleon IV had he ever ascended. He actually dies in one of our colonial wars, the Zulu War in 1879, which causes certain diplomatic feelings between France and Britain. I think that it is that the Bonapartism and Napoleon I in particular, it's a thing of the past, and it's something that can be safely admired from nearly a century on. I think there's that degree that's going on certainly to a great extent.
Yeah, I think also I think the point that Napoleon is defeated is very important, but also the fact that certainly at the time there was a sense of sportsmanship, if you can call it that, within warfare, and that changes radically in the 20th century with total war. But before then, the officer corps would be taught on the military tactics of the other side as well, and they would study, and you would go to Sandhurst and learn. And it's interesting when you get to a period probably about 75 years out from the Battle of Waterloo, so 1890, suddenly the cult of Napoleon is becoming really prominent. This is a point where it really marks that transition from Napoleon being a threat or the enemy to actually being somebody who was widely revered and understood as being a great military genius and tactician. And so in 1890, there's a whole flurry of activity around celebrating the anniversary, and it's partly for that reason that Conan Doyle starts to write stories that are set in the Napoleonic period.
And this is also a time when a lot of the memoirs are coming out in French and English. A lot of the memoirs were written by veterans, but they'd been suppressed even in France because of, again, the political atmosphere. By the end of the century, they're regarded as relatively safe to publish. So an awful lot of those are being published in the 1880s, 1890s, and they're being translated straight into English. And as Mark says, that Doyle is reading these in translation, as well as being able to read the original French volumes as well. So he's really suffusing himself with the atmosphere of the Napoleonic epic, and really diving deep into this.
And he really invests in Napoleon, writes several things, and talk a little bit about what Doyle does with Napoleon and how much he puts him into his works.
He writes a number. One of his earliest Napoleonic books is the Great Shadow, and the Great Shadow is Napoleon. And this is about it's set, the first half set in remote Scotland, and even there, the effect of the Great Shadow is felt, and it's Doyle exploring the feelings of the time.
Serve me right for not investigating that title. I told you it's on the shelf at the Rosenbach. We have a bunch of Sherlock Holmes books from Doyle and The Great Shadow, and honestly, I thought it must have been a spiritualist work.
It's called, actually, it's a great title for a spiritualist work.
Yes. If he hadn't used it for the Napoleonic one, he could have
now
written it.
Now that I know what it is, now I have to read it.
Yeah,
that's his. He then does another novel called Uncle Bernac, which is far less successful. And that's it's a kind of thriller spy story type thing set in the camp at Boulogne when the Grande Armée was preparing to invade England before the Battle of Trafalgar scotched those plans. But that's far less successful, and Doyle he falls into what the trap he sometimes does in historical fiction is he gives you a parade of characters of the time and shows off his research, and it slows down the action of the story, and there's a bit too much of that. So that one wasn't so successful, but then he comes to his greatest Napoleonic works, because one of the memoirs he's read is the memoirs of Baron de Marbeau, who was a dashing chasseur officer, and he is the beau of all sort of Napoleonic French. I think Doyle called it, the number one, or the leading soldier memoirs. This is the best, Marbeau, and that leads. And I'll let Mark explain on this too, to his famous character Brigadier Gerard.
Yeah, Gerard. So Brigadier Gerard is a hussar officer, and these are a fantastic set of tales which combine comedy, drama, action, romance. He's the classic sort of he would be a kind of Hollywood hero. He covers all of the full gamut, and these are tremendous short stories. He started to write them around 1893-4, shortly after he'd been to America on tour. And while he was over there, he met SS McClure, and McClure had been really interested in Napoleon as well, and it was on the back of their conversations that he decided to put pen to paper to these short stories. And a bit like Holmes, actually, he takes a break from him at one point and then comes back and does another series, and there are a couple of outliers within that as well. The thing I always find quite interesting is that when he finishes the memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, the thing he goes on to, the next thing in serial fiction, is going to be Gerard. And then when he's finished next time round, he goes on to he goes back into the Gerard again, and Gerard almost becomes like a palate cleanser after doing too much Sherlock Holmes. But the reason he's probably quite so, I think the reason why Doyle is so fond of him in part is because writing the stories came very, very naturally to him, in a way that actually the plotting of the Sherlock Holmes stories became very difficult. And it became a very conscious exercise. The thing that you really get from the Gerard stories is that they have enormous joy to them, and it is infectious. So if you haven't read them, you should really go read them, because they are tremendous stories.
It was on my to-do list for last summer if we finished the last run of Sherlock, and I couldn't get to them. So now it's absolutely gonna happen now. Because they really are it's the most famous group of stories after Sherlock by Doyle. People that they're the ones that people know as the Brigadier stories. So
I think I would argue as well. I don't know if Mark would agree with me, but I think that the Gerard stories do represent the best of Conan Doyle's historical fiction, because he's letting go and enjoying himself, and he doesn't allow them to plod. He doesn't allow his research and history itself to get in the way of a good story and a good character. And they just, you can tell that he's enjoyed himself writing them, and hopes that we're going to enjoy ourselves reading them as much.
Yeah.
Interesting. All righty. All right, everyone. Now we'll see if we can get the, Gerard Biblioventures going at some point. Nice.
Well, I hope so.
Here's our shelf of Doyle minus one thing. And this is the Christopher Morley, Holmes and Watson sign of four. We have another sign of four now. We got a Lippincott sign of four. That would be in between, but I don't have that in this picture. Return, memoirs. There it is. Great shadow.
There it is.
Right there in between them.
First US.
The great shadow. Right next to them, there's the empty house. So manuscript. But yeah, there it is, sitting waiting for me to read it. Our shelf at the Rosenbach. So I will certainly get to that now. All right. So Napoleon, big deal still to people. They love him. Not unusual that Lestrade would think that maybe there's somebody going around, who's like completely angry at Napoleon, who has also a hatred for him, because he's still significant. He still matters to people, as a historical figure, at least. And that's what he thinks. It's a criminal or a lunatic. Holmes says Holmes calls him, but Holmes thinks it's a coincidence that a promiscuous iconoclast would begin, on 3 specimens of the same bust. I like that Doyle uses iconoclast, which literally means breaker of images. That's the Greek term for it, iconoclast. And
Doyle goes on to write a story in 1911 called The Iconoclast, which is actually the story of how the Venus de Milo came to have no arms. But it's a great little story. It finds its way eventually into Tales of Long Ago, but it's one of those ones that sort of is just written because he gets a great idea. In fact, it's not his idea. It's the idea of his old school friend from Stonyhurst, Jimmy Ryan. He was a great collector of Roman and Greek artifacts, probably a bit like Dr. Barnicott. And he came up with the idea for this story and threw it to Conan Doyle, who said, "Yeah, okay, could probably make something of that."
I have 2 more Napoleon things in this rabbit hole that I wanted to hit first, though. One is this quote from Doyle. It was an interview piece that he did for the McClure Syndicate, A. Conan Doyle at Home, 1894, and they asked him about the Gerard stories, and then he writes, he, meaning Napoleon, was a wonderful man, perhaps the most wonderful man who ever lived. What strikes me is the lack of finality in his character. When you make up your mind that he is a complete villain, you come on some noble trait, and then your admiration of this is lost in some act of incredible meanness. But just think of it. Here was a young fellow of 30, a man who had no social advantages and but slight educational training, a member of a poverty-stricken family, entering a room with a troop of kings at his heels, and all the rest of them jealous if he spoke a moment longer to one than to the others. Then there must have been a great personal charm about the man, for some of those intimate with him loved him. I like how he's kind of like, you could say he's a complete villain, but then you miss something when you do that, or you come across something once you make that decision. But it's also, Doyle seems to understand that he could be a hero or a villain.
And you get this very much in the Gerard stories, where there's points where Napoleon insults Gerard, and then he makes up for the insult. He'll do the classic Napoleon thing of tugging the ear to show a kind of fondness for him. He knows he's stepped over the mark a bit too much, and you get this throughout Doyle's Napoleonic fiction, where he is playing with both sides of Napoleon's character and does show that he can be a tyrant, but then he can bring himself down to the level of the common soldier and be very, and acts of kindness.
And that's something that existed at the time of Napoleon as a commander, as well as being an interpretation later. So he is yes, he is a fickle character, but he has an enormous love of his men, and he inspires the love of his men. I would say in British history, we have, of course, Nelson is probably the great alternate to Napoleon, being contemporaries. And Nelson is classically the one who is all about his men and making sure that they are looked after, and he was enormously inspired by the Band of Brothers speech from Henry IV.
I was thinking the Shakespeare's Henry V.
That's it. That's his mantra, and he sticks to that all the time. You don't get quite the same thing with Napoleon, but you have the capacity in Napoleon to inspire great adoration from his troops. And
you've got the sorry, Matt.
That's fine.
You've got the battle cry is never "Vive la France." It's "Vive l'Empereur." It's a person. His men are shouting for Napoleon, and they're going out to die for Napoleon. France as well, but it's Napoleon is in the battle cry.
Yeah.
Well, there is a strong Rosenbach connection to Napoleon. We even have artifacts now in our collections. I think we have one Napoleon letter in our collection. We have connections to his family that came to like Philadelphia and New Jersey and settled here. We have some connections in our artifacts for there too. But Dr. Rosenbach, as becoming this great, his stature in the book selling business in the early 20th century, acquiring so many famous books, manuscripts. His nickname was the Napoleon of the auction house, and he wore that proudly, and he liked people to say that about him. But Dr. R also collected some interesting Napoleana at one point and put it in this catalog, and then sold it. And there was a notice in the New York Times when he first got it. Here it is: relics of Napoleon come to America. Collection bought by Dr. Rosenbach include drinking cup, plate, and clothing. And there'll be something else mentioned later here, which is even more interesting than those items. This is the catalog for it. It was the Vignali collection. Vignali was the French, one of the two French priests that attended Napoleon in his last days, and Abbe Vignali was left Napoleon left him some money, and a bunch of his artifacts were to go to him as well. And they all his Napoleon's band at the end kind of divided up his possessions, and Vignali got someone, and this collection came through the Vignali family, and then was later sold. 1924, Dr. Rosenbach bought this collection for £400. And it was all stuff brought back from St. Helena. Here's a silver cup. There were his cutlery embossed with the imperial coat of arms at the bottom. So Napoleon ate his meat off of this fork, kind of thing about it. These are relics. And here's a listing of them all. And one here, number 9, I will draw your attention to. A mummified tendon taken from Napoleon's body during the post-mortem. The authenticity of this remarkable relic has lately been confirmed by the publication in the Revue des Mots of a posthumous memoir of Saint Denis, in which he expressly states that he and Vignali took away small pieces of Napoleon's corpse during the autopsy. And they did. And this happened. This tendon here is a euphemism because it is Napoleon's penis.
Yes.
and everyone knew it. That's why he could put just that's in the mummified tendon in the descriptive catalog here. People knew what they were talking about. It had been rumored. They had taken away other pieces. I think some ribs maybe might have existed at one point. But this was the, I mean, if you could have that or have one of the original death masks, one of the original casts, well, I could tell you what I would have taken. They this it was Dr. Roosevelt did sell this collection. And then it passed, I think, a couple hands, and it was original, and then it was later sold. Its final owner was Dr. John K. Latimer, who was the chairman of the urology department at Columbia University. And he collected odd things. He had some Lincoln things from the assassination, some things about Kennedy's assassination, and he liked these kinds of things in his collection. And as a urologist, he had it tested and 100% confirmed this is his penis.
Wow.
There's a story, I don't know if it's true, that it was offered to France, and then the government of France said no.
No thanks.
They didn't want to admit that this is the story, that they didn't want to admit that his penis was actually taken and this is it. Like, they didn't want any parts of this part. So Latimer died in 2007, and as far as I know, the family's never sold it. They've never said, oh, let's put this on the market, we'll get a lot for us. That they have been very respectful, like Latimer was as a physician, in that he thought that this should remain in a private collection, not for the and also because of this, no pictures of it exist. No one ever took a photo.
Well, that's a relief.
They took photos of the other things, but they didn't take a photo of this. But it was exhibited.
Oh, no.
Dr. Rosenbach loaned it to an exhibition that went up in where is it? In New York City at the Museum of French Art. No, it was in France. It went to France in the Museum of French Art, and a New York paper wrote this about it. It featured the tendon, and it said, maudlin sentimentalizers sniffed, shallow women giggled, pointed. In a glass case, they saw something looking like a maltreated strip of buckskin shoelace or shriveled eel.
Well, I always thought that it had ended up in the Louvre, but maybe that's just myth, or maybe there's more than one. Does this account for Napoleon's great fame, or indeed is it bits of the True Cross, which if you collected it together would be about 300 foot tall? So
it's I connect all the pieces of Napoleon's penis, and it's like, oh my God, you have the largest penis in history. It's partly funny. Part of me is like, oh my gosh, wouldn't you hate that if that was you and you were the figure? But it's just, I'm more iconoclastic at heart anyway, and I'm totally fine with it existing out there and people making fun of it. I've often thought that I'd love to write a pastiche of someone coming to Holmes for help and finding because it's been stolen, and just think of the penis puns you could put all through that story.
Don't put that idea out there.
No, definitely not.
Call it The Adventure of the Sex Napoleon. There you go.
But just reminding people, the Sherlock Holmes Journal doesn't publish fiction.
So yeah, so and Dr. Rosenbach loved this and loved to talk about it when he had it, and I showed it to people. He just thought this was great. So yeah, so the great Rosenbach connection to Napoleon is we had his penis at one point. So, but don't anymore. I think of the programming possibilities. I could have that if we still had it in our collection. All righty. Well, where do you go from there? Well, luckily we have a story to jump right back into. Watson is asked immediately about this. And he even comes up with the official diagnosis. French psychologists call this the E-Day fix, which again is a kind of thing that helps for me ties these stories to Poe, and that Poe loved this idea of the E-Day fix and monomania. E-Day fix is a kind of monomania focused on an obsession of one thing. And Poe uses this and for several of his mad characters, and Telltale Heart, Ligeia Berenice, like there's and more. Poe loved this idea, and so I can't, I think that's something that put this part of it in Doyle's head. But Holmes,
yeah, he does. Doyle does use it himself as well in other stories too. I mean,
yeah.
there's Uncle Jeremy's Household. I think there's Need-A Fix and The Mystery of Cloomber. And later he does it. It comes back again in the Blue John Gap as well. So he talks about the E-Day fix. So it's something that, and monomania, they come back time and time again. It's clearly something he's interested in.
Not Holmes. No. That won't work, because like this is somebody who's literally searching for a specific bust, not busts of Napoleon, and and they would have to find out where these specific ones were. So Holmes right off the bat thinks that that's not just some madman. This is somebody who's specifically gone after these particular busts, and it might be absurd, but you don't want to forget, Watson, the dreadful business of the Abernethy family was first brought to my notice by the depth which the parsley had sunk into the butter upon a hot day. One of the great Sherlock quotes. One of the great unrecorded cases. So
I like the Richard Lanson Green in the Oxford edition in the 90s has a wonderful footnote on this, connecting it to a scandal about inferior butter being traded as Danish butter, when in fact it was, what was it, Russian, and it was a scandal in August 1903. I thought, but the best thing about it was the Hudson brothers who were behind it, and so Richard says, "Is this why there is a character called Morse Hudson in it?" Now, it's a wonderful leap, but it's probably a tad too far for this one, but nice anyway.
And many people have tried this, and apparently parsley doesn't sink in butter. It just even if as it melts, it'll just stay on top and float. So, we don't know. But maybe it was this inferior butter that was put on the market.
There you go. That's it.
Yeah.
Abernethy's another Poe connection, isn't it? Because there's an Abernethy and purloined letter, I think. Isn't there in purloined letter? Maybe I'll have to check.
I didn't catch.
Maybe I'm misremembering.
No, I didn't catch that. If that is a link there, thank you. I'm gonna have to look that up. Because I spent all my time. Did Poe use the term E-Day fix? And he didn't. So I was like searching and searching to see if he used the term, and he didn't. That at least that I found. He always said monomania, but I didn't search for Abernethy. So yeah, there you go. And I don't remember that in purloined. Okay. Well, now they Holmes is, tells him, keep me informed, which is nice. And then a development happens. He gets a telegram. They have to go to a crime scene, and as soon as they arrived, it's a murder. Well, even just Holmes knows it's attempted murder at the least. Nothing less will hold the London message boy. There's a deed of violence indicated in that fellow's round shoulders and outstretched neck as he's kind of looking, and trying to look in the doorway when they arrive. I like that little bit of observation there. So,
and this is taking place on Pitt Street, isn't it? This is Pitt Street, and Pitt Street is actually where one of Conan Doyle's sisters lived, Connie.
In Kensington, huh?
Yeah, she lived with E.W. Horner, the author of Raffles. And it's a Raffles connection to this story as well. Yeah, come back to that.
And I think we were also with Pitt Street, William Pitt the Younger being one of Napoleon's leading adversaries. There's a nice little joke going on there, I'm quite sure.
Thank you for that, because I don't have that. But it's nice because I don't have those. Yeah, some of those references, and I don't even like that. It's Kensington doesn't matter. Is this any kind of
Oh, Kensington's an up and coming area.
Yeah,
I mean,
okay.
it's interesting. He's got Kennington Road and he's got Kensington Road in this, and this is,
This is
but
Kensington. Yeah,
this is Kensington. Kennington Road, though, we skipped over that, but
yeah,
one of the reasons why it might be suggested that it's a madman on the loose is that Kennington Road is where Bedlam was located, where
yeah, close by.
the Bedlam Hospital. So it may well be that that's something else that's going on there. So Lestrade's suggestion might not be quite as off the wall as it might originally. As readers at the time might have thought. Actually, well, there is a bit of a connection there.
They arrive, and it's Mr. Horace Harker, his house, of the Central Press Syndicate. So it's a journalist at the house here. It's the Napoleon bust business again, said Lestrade. I like that line. And apparently this time, though, the bust was stolen, and then Harker goes out, and there's a body on his doorstep. And Doyle just loves to describe it here. He gives it a nice gruesome discovery. A great gash in his throat, and the whole place swimming in blood. He lay on his back, his knees drawn up, and his mouth horribly open. Very, viciously killed, throat slash, blood all over the place. I love it. So I love the reputation of the Strand, and like it's the family magazine, and then we're gonna make sure we change any references to like God to like holy, or like they'll do those things, but they're just fine with like, yeah, show the bloody bodies. That's good.
I don't know if this is also sorry, Mark, one of Doyle's occasional references to the Jack the Ripper case.
That's where I was going.
We've got the body lying on its back, legs drawn, a cut throat, and also the fact that Horace Harker works for the Central News Syndicate, or the Central News Agency, and the famous Jack the Ripper letter was sent to the Central News Agency, not to an individual newspaper. And this, I think Doyle's making this point with Horace Harker here, that Central News Syndicate, he'll be able to get stories everywhere. He's not working for one particular newspaper. He's working for a syndicate. And so he'll be able to, and that's the thing, again, why he's so upset. He's got this story that he can't quite write himself. So I think there might be a sly little Ripper reference going on.
There you go. Or if you're playing the great game, this is the way that Watson is letting us know that gradually, in tiny pieces, that Holmes was involved in the Ripper investigation. On the victim, tall, sunburnt, very powerful, not more than 30, poorly dressed, but doesn't appear to be a laborer. In his pockets, he has an apple, some string. People always have string in their pockets. I don't know why. People wear string around all the time. That's at least the second time somebody's had string in their pockets in a home story.
The great string thefts of the late Victorian period.
Some string, a showing map of London, and a photograph. And the photograph is of an alert, sharp-featured simian man. All I picture is like Planet of the Apes, right? So with thick eyebrows and a very peculiar projection of the lower part of the face, like the muzzle of a baboon.
And that's just the start, because Beppo gets really is not an attractive guy, but also it is. You have to think about the stereotyping in this as well, because the Italian characters, and Beppo in particular, is characterized as being simian, ape-like,
animalistic,
animal, base. So there is something else going on there as well.
This is a part of those criminological theories at the time.
Yeah,
that you
can Ambrosio stuff.
That these criminals are genetically criminal. And you can see it in their features. They look more like animals than they look like humans. And Lombroso wrote about this, and Doyle has used this throughout his stories. But there's just a general anxiety in his culture at the time, not only at criminals being these kind of animals savage animals that we have to control, but for this particular story, it really highlights this idea that they're foreigners.
Yeah, the violence imported into London is a big theme. I mean, it goes right back to Study in Scarlet, doesn't it, with the Mormon? So, you know, this is I mean, often people connect it more to a kind of post-colonial reading, but you can't do that in this instance because it's an Italian coming across.
Yeah.
But I think there's definitely that worry, that anxiety about foreigners or in London at the time. There weren't that many. There were about 12,000 Italians in London at this time, and population was probably around about 1 million or something. So, you know, wasn't significant.
They seem to be particularly associated, with secret societies and that sort of thing. It's similar with, again, back to the Ripper case with the East End, with the Jewish immigrants coming from the pogroms in Central Europe and Russia. It's again the same sort of fears are surrounding there. And this is why, if there's a major crime, let's pin it on them.
Yeah. And we'll get some more about this area later, the Saffron Hill area. Holmes, oh yeah, and he's also, but just by the way he got into the window and the carpet, he either has long legs or he's a most active man. Again, it's just more animal-like. He's more like an animal than he is a person. And then they discover that the bust was broken a few hundred yards away in front of another house, and they go up and they see it. Holmes picked up several of the pieces, examined them carefully, because he's now already thinking there's something in one of these busts. You know, I mean, this is something that he hasn't said out loud, but he already knows, because he already knows that particular busts are being taken and broken. He's already thinking why there must be something in one of them.
Well, I mean, I think it's the top of the second page in the Strand that he establishes that they're all busts from the same mold.
Yeah.
So already from the beginning, his mind is connecting to the fact that there's something that brings these particular busts together. But did you spot also the name of the house that the bust is broken in front of? He says it's the empty house in Camden House Road.
Empty house.
And so the empty house is Camden House. And of course that's, you know,
in the story. So explain this more for people might not know. In the story, the Adventure of the Empty House across from Baker Street is called Camden House. CAMDEN. Here he's got an extra P in there.
And somewhat bizarrely, if you go and walk Baker Street, there is actually it's not I think it's some shop now or something, but if you look above the doorway, there is one about halfway down Baker Street called Camden House.
Yeah.
And when people have done the sort of tracing of all of the kind of wanderings from Baker Street to get to the back of this house, you sort of come up with that kind of location for it.
These words stick in his mind. They just keep coming out in stories.
Coming back.
Yeah. It is and now Holmes gives us he gives his deductions so far kind of thing here. He goes through, first it's not monomania. We've already had that because he's looking for particular busts. And now he says the possession of a bust is worth even murdering somebody. So it's that valuable. So this is, again, got to, feed into his idea that must be something in one of them. And that, of course, now they figure out, well, why did he break it here? Why didn't he break it at the other empty house that he had passed? Because there was a light overhead and a street lamp where he could see. And then Lestrade mentions that Dr. Barnicott's bust was broken not far from his red lamp.
Yeah. It's the symbol of the practitioner, the medical practitioner.
Yeah, a medical practitioner has a red, because I guess you could see it through their window. They have a red lamp in their room, so you could see it. And
it's outside. It's on the street.
Oh, it was outside. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so it was on the street just to indicate that there was a doctor there. So Doyle wrote that wonderful set of stories around the red lamp, which
around the red lamp, being facts and fancies of medical life. But there's also some other stories in there, including lot number 249.
That well-known story of medical life.
Yeah.
Well, the hero is training to be a doctor.
To be fair, yeah.
That's why. So
Just before that, actually, it's interesting in the narrative. Watson says that describes Napoleon as the great emperor, and that's the second reference we have him to being the great emperor. Sherlock Holmes calls him the great emperor earlier as well. So even Sherlock Holmes is an admirer of Napoleon.
the great emperor, yes. So people often put a bust of Napoleon in their Baker Street, recreations, but of course he broke his. So you have to have a broken one. If you're going to be real hardcore, you got to get one.
That's right.
Keep the pieces. So, so what? And then, well, what do we do with this fact? Lestrade asks, and this is a nice little, kind of piece of wisdom from Sherlock. Remember it, docket it.
Docketed, yeah.
Come on, we may come on something later which will bear upon it. And this is his method, right? That he comes across these things and let's hold on to this and then see if we can fit it into this, idea that I've put together for this, case.
And it's Lestrade's method that when he's told it, he ignores it completely.
Yeah. He's like, no. We just got to find who the dead
guy is. It's not that. It's just some mad bloke.
The most practical way of getting at it, Lestrade says, is to identify the dead man. And I don't know, if you asked any cops today, they would say like, we got to identify the dead man first and then work from what we have here, not work from what might be connected to this piece of the puzzle, but instead work from the body on out. So Holmes then sends the word back to Horace Harker to tell him that, it is certain that a dangerous homicidal lunatic with Napoleonic delusions was in his house. And Lestrade does like, you don't seriously believe that? Holmes smiled. Don't I? Well, perhaps I don't. I'm sure it will interest Mr. Horace Harker and the subscribers of the Central Press Syndicate. Yeah. I love that little bit. And then he has to keep the picture, and he lets him. Why? He lets him keep the picture.
Despite the fact that he's just argued that the body holds the key.
Right.
Yeah. Well, there's a great, but the exchange that they have in the Granada series is brilliant at that because they're actually identifying the body at this point in time. But
yes. He goes to the morgue in the Granada one. Here he says, I won't go to the morgue, but in that one, he does go to the morgue.
There's a very, very strange sequence where Jeremy Brett is looking up the actor's nose. But there is a bit, Lestrade hands him the photograph and basically what Holmes says, all right, I'm going to keep this. And he says, but that could be valuable evidence. He says, well, if it wasn't of value, I wouldn't want it. Great line. But I like this thing, again, going back to your point about Jack the Ripper, Paul. I mean, obviously, using the news agency to put out the word about a homicidal maniac is suggestive. And because that was the whole thing that fueled it, was what the Central News Agency, later the Central Press Syndicate, that was the whole thing that sort of lit the fire under this.
Yeah, which is why the argument about the Jack the Ripper postcard being written by a journalist makes absolute sense.
Exactly.
Because anyone else would have just sent it to an individual newspaper or not to the agency. Whereas Holmes in this story obviously knows that Horace Harker works for the agency. All the newspapers will get this story that I want to feed them.
Yeah. I do wonder why this chap is tracked down. Well, okay, I was about to give away what's going to happen in this, but
we know what happens.
Okay, that's fine. That's the
story we're doing. We're not holding.
We know that as Pietro's been killed and in a fight with Beppo. I do wonder, how on earth he's tracked down Beppo and whether or not he's entirely on the same trail that Beppo is on in terms of what he's trying to, what Beppo's trying to source at this point. It's never entirely clear in the story.
I think it does make sense from Lestrade at one point that he has found Beppo's trail and he has tracked him and he has seen him there. Like he's literally following him. That makes a lot of sense. And Benucci doesn't know anything about the busts. He just knows that he's tracking down Beppo at this point. But we don't know anything about their their connections at all by the end, except that only that they are connected. Holmes and Watson go to Morse Hudson, and who sold the busts, and he's confirmed it's a nihilist plot. No one but an anarchist would go breaking statues. Red Republicans, that's what I call Red Republicans. Were they aren't they like French Revolution supporters? I don't know. Because I don't think were communists called Red Republicans already by then, or Reds by then. I don't know.
I don't think this is in mind.
The red flag was definitely their symbol. I mean, I think this is the red flag really was symbolic during the Commune in Paris in 1871. I think that's where this sort of imagery of red associated with far left wing politics is coming in here, and Morse Hudson's just scrambling everything up.
Yeah, it's all together for him. Well, as people will do, it's not a particular ideology from that is any different from anyone. They're all the same against our government and us.
And there's a lovely irony going on here, which of course Morse Hudson would be incapable of seeing, that Napoleon started his own career as a revolutionary. As he started his career in the Corsican independence movement and the French Revolution. He started as a rebel and became this grand emperor. And Hudson would be incapable of seeing the irony in what he's saying.
Well, they show the picture to him, and he's the one. Hudson is the one that identifies him. Why it's Beppo. Note too, he's the only one that doesn't call Beppo ugly when he looks at the picture. But maybe because he knows him. Well, no, the other guy knows him, but he still calls him ugly. He was a kind of Italian piecework man who made himself useful in the shop. He could carve a bit and gild a frame, do odd jobs, but he was only here a short time. He left me last week, and I've heard nothing of him. So he just appeared suddenly recently, and now he's gone. And Holmes knows now we have Beppo as the common factor between the two places. So the connection through who sold the busts. So he's Holmes. This is again, and this isn't evident as you're reading the story, but this is by the time you get to the end, you realize this is Holmes piecing it together now. Now he knows that he's Beppo was worked briefly for this guy who sold the busts. So he clearly this is where he would have gotten the information.
This is also where I think. While we haven't revealed yet what is in the busts to the reader, this is where, since we know what happens, the parallels with the Blue Carbuncle become even more apparent, because this is a story that heavily riffs off what is already written before. Yeah. But essentially in the Blue Carbuncle, they're tracing a goose, and in the Six Napoleons, they're tracing Beppo. So if you just, it's a bit like the Priory School in Silver Blaze, and if you replace a horse with a missing schoolboy, then you get basically the same story. So here it is. You can see that in plot terms, that's what he's doing. He's basically going, okay, well, what are the movements that Beppo made, and how do we track those?
Beppo's the MacGuffin.
He's the MacGuffin.
Yeah, because he doesn't matter in the end. It's really all about the pearl. So.
That's it.
All righty. Well, now they're heading off to the where the molds are the busts are made. And I love this shoot through London, although I have read that like you can't do this. Like there, you have to like go all over the place. It's like Rocky's run in the Rocky movie. Everybody knows this. Rocky runs through the streets of South Philly, and then he winds up at the art museum steps. But when they do the shots of him running all around the city, it's like a 50-mile run he'd have to take to do this in one shot. Like he couldn't go through these particular neighborhoods at these locations and go from South Philly to the art museum steps. But
this sequence actually reminded me of another story, a story called Amaroff the Pole, which is actually by Bertram Fletcher Robinson, and it's written after this. It's written in 1905. It stars his rather boring detective character Addington Peace, but at one point, probably the highlight of it is actually a travel through London, and it's almost like a travelogue. It goes through from one end of London to the other. But the interesting thing about it is that Amaroff who has been murdered, Hammer off the pole, who has been murdered, obviously you think he's an innocent victim throughout, but it turns out that he was planning to murder the Tsar, who was about to visit, by planting a dynamite stick in a bust that the Tsar was about to view. So this is Bertrand Fletcher Robinson borrowing heavily from his friend's story.
And for those who might not remember off the bat, Fletcher Robinson is Hound of the Baskervilles is dedicated to him because Doyle said that this was a story that they came up with together. Robinson told him about these hound legends on the moors, and then some people have argued, especially after Doyle died, that really Fletcher Robinson came up with this, and well, it's clear that they came up with it together. Doyle used those. It's also clear that he compensated Robinson for it as well. But then Robinson did go on to write things, and there are all kinds of parallels with the things that Robinson wrote. That
parallels is putting it nicely.
I gave you the hound. I'm going to take whatever I want from now on. But it's I love the succinctness of this. We pass through the fringe of fashionable London, hotel London, theatrical London, literary London, commercial London, and finally maritime London, till we came to a riverside city of 100,000 souls, where the tenement houses swelter and reek with the outcasts of Europe. There it is again, underlying, anxiety in this story that's going on. And even when they get to the warehouse, it's run by a German, and he has to mention that he's German, a big blonde German who was nice, and he's not, there's no anxiety here kind of thing. And actually the Germans are nice, good guys for Doyle. But he has to mention that he's German. And even later, his blue Teutonic eyes, like he has to keep emphasizing that this isn't a Londoner. These aren't the people that we're dealing with here. These are people who've come from somewhere else, who are doing things here, who might be tied to anarchists and nihilists and red Republicans. This guy says that it was this is work. The work there is usually done by Italians, and then he looks at the picture and yes, indeed, I know him well. This has always been a respectable establishment, and the only time we ever had the police in it was over this very fellow Beppo. It was more than a year ago now. He knifed another Italian in the street, and then he came to the works with the police on his heels, and he was taken here. Beppo was his name. His second name I never knew. Served me right for engaging a man with such a face. There's another one. Like, oh my God, look how ugly this guy is. Why do we even hire him being this ugly? But he was a good workman. One of the best, even though he murdered some guy right out front.
There's in this point, this is where you start to get a bit of detail in the plaster bust manufacturing. It's worth saying at this point that the story almost certainly is based on Conan Doyle's personal experience, because he got involved in this rather bizarre thing, which was a sculpting machine. And the story is that April 1902, he went to Naples to visit his sister Ida and her husband Nelson. And while he was over there, he met a guy called Augusto Bontempi, not the inventor of the electronic keyboard, who had invented the Mechanoglofo, which was a carving machine that could replicate plaster busts, and so stone busts. So he Doyle was really impressed by this, bought the British rights, and about a year later set up this company, the Automated Sculpture Syndicate, with a very dodgy Anglo American sculptor by the name of William G. Jones, no relation, who basically was a bit of a con man as well. And but by the time that this story was written, there had been an enormous splurge in the press about the Automated Sculpture Syndicate, and about the fact that Conan Doyle's company was going to be able to recreate busts at a fraction of the cost. He said that it would, they would make busts for like £10 and sell them for 25. It was making enormous amounts of money. The slight problem for Conan Doyle was that it didn't work, and so he then spent the next 3 years in legal cases with Jones and extricating himself from this. But George Newnes, was the proprietor of the Strand, was one of the people he tried to bring in as a shareholder.
Oh, I
And
didn't
he
know that. I
and,
didn't remember that. Yeah.
and Nunes basically turned around and said, "Yeah, don't like the look of this." So he was a smarter read on the situation. But I do think it's interesting when you get to the next Strand illustration, the next Paget illustration of the owner of Gelder and Company, because he definitely looks familiar to me with his. Have you got that one?
Yeah. Let me share that now. There we go. This one? Ah, the
There
rascal.
you go. The chap on the left, he looks a little bit Conan Doily to me, with his mustache and his receding hairline and his strong build. So yeah, so the proprietor. So I would do wonder if, given that the company was going well at this point, they'd just done a ton of promotion for it. This could well be an early bit of product placement looking into literature.
I'm glad you brought that up. I had another episode that I can't remember what, I don't know if it was, I don't think it was the one that you and the Norwood Builder, but one of the other episodes, there was something that I was going to start mentioning the Doyle connection at that, and then I couldn't fit it in because we were, too many other rabbit holes. So I was quickly right now trying to see if I had images ready for that, but I can't find them.
I've got one actually, but I'm not sure if I can share
If you could just if you send the link to me to the lecture
Anyone.
you and Ross given,
Yeah.
right? I'll put that link in the chat for everybody.
Right.
A great story about Doyle being involved in this, invention.
Mad.
That just didn't work. And
Yeah.
but it was written up. Wasn't there a piece in that? Was it in the Strand or just in other places that
Oh
showed?
yeah, it was in the Strand.
In the Strand.
It was in
about
American journals, Illustrated News.
these statues and then showing, look, and we can make the same statue. You too can own, Michelangelo's David.
There you go. The first 3D printer.
Yeah. So that didn't work.
No. Just ahead of his time.
Yeah. So we get a little more about Beppo there, and now we find out that, that he's also that you're not only does he look like a savage, he knifed someone, but he was a good worker. He was he's another guy. He was a good workman, one of the best. I think everybody loves that this guy is a workman, but be careful he doesn't knife you. And he has a cousin of his there at the place, and Holmes specifically says, do not, tip off the cousin that we're looking for Beppo. Good job, Sherlock, there. Now they go to lunch, and then he reads the newspaper account that mentions from Horace Harker, and Holmes reads the quote out loud, which he finds funny. It is satisfactory to know there can be no difference of opinion upon this case, since Mr. Lestrade, one of the most experienced members of the official force, and Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the well-known consulting expert, have each come to the conclusion that the grotesque series of incidents which have ended in so tragic a fashion arise from lunacy rather than from deliberate crime. No explanation save mental aberration can cover the facts. And Holmes has the great line, the press, Watson, is a most valuable institution if you only know how to use it.
Wonderful.
Is this the first time Sherlock's used? I think this is the first time he's used the press like this. It might be the first and only time that he's planted a
case of identity, I think. Case of
identity.
There's something in there.
Planted a false story to get someone off the track. I'm not
sure there's another one.
Yeah, someone in the chat might have one. But it's, something that I don't think is usually associated with Holmes, is that he could manipulate the press to get the results that he wants to get here. And it's so ironic because Lestrade doesn't even think this is a reason anymore. Because when they were just speaking, he was like, sure, you don't believe Holmes. So Lestrade's now like, come on, I don't think that's true.
Well, you see, Holmes can do this because you at one point you're thinking, well, hang on a minute, he's going to trash his reputation here, putting around this rubbish. But of course, he's got his get out of jail free card, which is Dr. Watson, who's going to write this up and show that it was all just Holmes's cunning all along. Maybe actually what happened was that Holmes was all in on the monomaniac theory with Lestrade, and then actually Watson's having to patch this up and make him look better in the retelling.
Well, Holmes later on specifically tells Watson to write this one up, doesn't he?
He does.
Yes. Yeah, he tells him specifically to write this up.
Yeah, and make me look great.
Well, now they go to see the manager of Harding Brothers. He's never seen he can't identify Beppo. He's never seen it, but you would hardly forget it, would you? I've seldom seen it uglier. Oh, gee, take it easy, people. Everybody's got to have a comment on how ugly this guy is when you show them the picture, And then have we any Italians on the staff? And I said Italians because I think that's what he would have said. Italians. Yes, we have several work people, cleaners. So this is a story where we're they're searching for specific specific nationality is what they're doing here. So
well, have we had reference to Inspector Hill by this point? I think Inspector Hill is Lestrade's
Italian expert.
He's the one who knows about this area of London, isn't he?
We get to him. We'll get to him in just a second. Lestrade comes back. Holmes tells Lestrade, then they meet. Holmes tells him, I can trace the bus from the beginning, and Lestrade's like, what? Yeah. The bus, there's a dead body. That's all that matters, and he's identified. He is because he had a Catholic emblem around his neck, along with his color, made me think that he was from the South, and they find that it's from Inspector Hill, that it was Pietro Vanucci from Naples, and he's connected with the mafia, which, as you know, is a secret political society enforcing its decrees by murder. And now contemporaries were like, what political society? They're just criminals. But this is, it's not unusual at this time for that all to be connected. But for people in England, the British readers especially, mafia is a term that they're not really familiar with.
This is not. Yeah, I mean, it's still a relatively new term.
It goes back to 1860 in America, but it would be associated with not just criminal gangs, but with political agitators, Italian political agitators. And it's the mafia is definitely established as a as an organized crime criminal gang by the 1890s in several cities in the US by then. But I think correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not really in England, right?
No, not at all.
You've got earlier than this. I mean, Mark has earlier mentioned E.W. Hornung with the Raffles stories, and there's two specific Raffles stories, The Fate of Faustina and The Last Laugh, where Raffles gets tied up with the Italian gangs, but it's the Camorra who who from Naples.
Yeah,
he gets on the wrong side of them. So there is an interest with writers with these societies, but even more specifically for Doyle, one of his favorite stories was always The Pavilion on the Links by Robert Louis Stevenson.
Yeah,
which involves Italian secret societies. But with that, it's the Carbonari. So it's more that is the political side, the Italian nationalists who are involved in the wars of liberation, and the characters get on the wrong side of them. And interestingly, with that story connected to this one of the Italians is specifically mentioned in Stevenson's story called Beppo. And I think this is where Doyle gets the name from, and it's either a remembered name or a tip of the hat to Stevenson, because throughout his career, Doyle really just couldn't emphasize enough how much he loved The Pavilion on the Links.
Yeah, we see the echoes of that story all the time.
It's all over.
When we get to the next podcast we're doing on The Man from Archangel, it comes up again there. So
is that
in The Great Shadow, which we mentioned earlier?
True.
There are connections to it there.
Is that Horning story, that Raffles story, is that after this one? Because some of them were
Before.
before this. It is before? Okay.
It's before. Mm.
Okay. Because then
There's
Doyle
another-
should have gotten it right, that it should have been the Camorra, not the Mafia with Naples, with the
Yes.
Naples connection. So,
The other raffle story that happens before this is called The Gift of the Emperor, which is 1899. It's the end of the first series, and that has a MacGuffin in it where there is a stolen gem. I don't think we know what it is. But
It's the gem
is
will
it,
be the same sort of gem we'll be talking about later.
is it right?
there
And
you
that
go.
is hidden in a bullet casing.
Yeah.
Ruffles hides that in a bullet casing, but that one is more obviously influenced by Conan Doyle in that that's the story in which Raffles apparently dies, only to come back again from the dead later. He falls overboard on a ship.
He must be dead. Yeah.
He must be dead because they look out and they can't see him. So,
And he can't swim that far to the shore.
No.
It's too far away. Is it?
But when he
And
sees,
it's Italy, isn't it? Isn't it Italy where he's going to?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
yeah, it's I think is it Naples?
yeah, it's off the coast.
Yeah,
Yeah,
There you go.
it is.
it all connects.
Oh, it all connect. This Wold Newton connection here we could do with all these stories. They and it's I thought there was an Italian, more of an Italian connection in other Sherlock Holmes stories, but it's not. It's only this one and then later the Red Circle, which we haven't done yet. But
that's right.
the only criminal Italian thing that Doyle does for the Sherlock stories.
His depiction of Saffron Hill is not unusual. I mean, it is pretty accurate. So around 1900 Saffron Hill, which is a bit of London, it's a borough of Clerkenwell, so it's not far from British Museum. If you're at British Museum and head east, basically, you're gonna get to Saffron Hill, and it's all around a community. The center of the community is really called St. Peter's Italian Church, which was built in the 1860s. It's still there to this day. I've been in it. Beautiful church, and it is the center of. It's still now the center of the largest Italian community in London.
Yeah.
So it goes back, but and it doesn't have the sort of criminal connections, although it did, interestingly, between the wars. There was a guy called Darby Sabini, who was a British-Italian mobster who basically ran protection rackets between the wars. And so he got a bad rap for crime, but after this story, not during or before. Darby Sabini. I love that name.
Saffron Hill, yeah, Darby Sabini, I like that. Lestrade gives him all this information, and he even says probably the photograph we found in his pocket is the man himself, which is another reminder that Holmes hasn't even told him who it is.
Yes.
And Holmes clapped his hands approvingly. And it doesn't say ironically. It's not sarcastically. It doesn't say Holmes clapped his hands, which if he just wrote Holmes clapped his hands, you think, oh, he's being, sarcastic here. No, it says approvingly, that like this seems genuine, that Holmes is like excellent. When he says excellent, he means excellent. But then there's a but, of course. I don't know why. Why then were the busts destroyed? And again, Lestrade's like, I don't understand why you're talking about this. Murder, theft, the breaking of busts. I don't care. I'm not going to put anything. I'm not gonna spend my time searching for who's breaking busts. It's the murder that I have to solve here. So, Holmes agrees that he'll go to the Saffron Hill only if that night he will go with Holmes. That if Lestrade will go with Holmes to Chiswick or Chiswick, I guess. Chiswick. An address. What kind of neighborhood is Chiswick?
West London. Very posh. Very posh.
Okay.
So just off the water, just off the river. So and it would have been well-to-do area then.
Well-to-do then as well, yeah. And that Holmes says we can get. The odds are 2-1 that we'll get. That's good odds that we'll catch him there. It's not certain, but it's really good odds that we'll catch him if we go there. Um, because what Holmes doesn't know is if in the last bust he found what he was looking for. Like he doesn't know that yet. So there's no way to know it. But he says I have a letter to send and it's important that it should go out at once. And this is then later because Josiah Brown says you sent me a letter, an express letter. But doesn't explain when did he send the letter to Sandiford and Reading, who comes in with the last bust? I don't know, unless he's sending 2 letters here, but he only
I think he's sending 2.
Um,
well, actually, he says, doesn't he, that he theorizes that Beppo is going to go after the closest bust first.
yes.
So he only contacts Brown.
But he still had to contact the other guy. When did he contact him to bring him
Yeah,
to
true.
the train and come down the same night, even? So, right? So I don't know. And then Holmes spent the evening in rummaging around the files of the old papers in which one of our lumber rooms was packed. I'll just ask now, what is he going through there? Is this about the Borgia Pearl?
Yeah. He's
Okay.
trying to dig up the records of, I think he's remembered that the Venucci is a name that he knows from the past. He's remembered that there's something happened a year ago and he's digging back through his records, but clearly not keeping up to date. Not keeping up to date with his commonplace books if he's just
I think it's an interesting comment as well on the Baker Street setup. One of our lumber rooms. So how many rooms are there?
Most of my rooms look like lumber rooms to be fair. So.
Yeah. It's not a lumber room. It's my study. What are you talking about? Now, okay. So, now I can't miss the point here of Holmes expected this grotesque criminal to make an attempt upon human. Even Holmes is like, he's grotesque.
Yeah.
Or Watson is at least.
Put a bag on his head when we catch him, please, quick.
And then Watson has this nice bit here. I could not but admire the cunning with which my friend had inserted the wrong clue in the evening paper so as to give the fellow the idea that he could continue his scheme with impunity. Mm-hmm. Confirmation that he's used the press, but done in a way that it's I'm going to show how this makes these men closer. That there's an admiration going from Watson to Holmes in doing this. Holmes, bring your revolver, and Holmes takes his loaded hunting crop. There you go. It's just his favorite weapon. And we've seen him with that before.
He's all in favor of beating criminals to death, as opposed to just shooting them.
So they go to Laburnum Villa in Chiswick, and this is the worst stakeout in the world because they can't even smoke.
No,
I'm on a stakeout. I'm like, I'm smoking. Nope, we can't even smoke. So,
hence the humbugs.
In the Granada series, they have the humbugs.
Yeah,
in the Granada series, they have the humbug. Actually, that's quite a nice bit for the relationship because they play Watson and Lestrade like 2 naughty schoolboys, really, and Watson offers Lestrade a humbug, and Holmes just says, "Watson, this is no time for humbugs." At which point Beppo comes running out of the hedges. But it's great. That whole thing reminds me again of that sort of stakeout in Speckled Band. He likes these kind of these moments.
And I think it again, because I certainly get this with the Speckled Band, and perhaps you think of Conan Doyle back in his younger day with the Society for Psychical Research doing his haunted house stakeouts. Mm. There's an air of that as well about this.
We had the stakeout in Black Peter in our last episode, in which Watson loads it up with all these like purple prose terms, like, "Oh, we're on the hunt for the beast," and then it's all to complete deflation because the guy shows up and he's this meek little guy that they have no hollering. So it winds up being funny, this whole build up to it. Here it's rather quick. It's just there and we just have to wait. So he doesn't put much time in it, and then it's a lithe, dark figure, as swift and active as an ape, of course.
There you
go. And Holmes goes and collars him right. He goes into the house. He comes out. He smashes the bust, and Holmes lets him do all this. He could have stopped him at any point, clearly, but he wants him to break it because he wants it to be found.
Yeah.
And then with the bound of a tiger, Holmes was on his back, and that was the original. That was the illustration that begun this story. The bound of a tiger. There he is on his back. Beppo the ape and Holmes the tiger. So that's the fight going on here.
Watson says, as we turned him over, I saw a hideous, sallow face with writhing, furious features glaring up at us, and I knew that it was indeed the man of the photograph whom we had secured. I think Paget could have gone a bit further on that.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, Paget should have just gone all in. This guy should have Quasimodo.
Made him, or like an ape, like a Planet of the Apes kind of ape. Ape human face.
Roddy McDowell.
But he does give him a particularly ugly look here.
Yeah,
and the glance.
He's a wrong
one. So they've collared him, and now it's Brown comes out, the owner of the house, Mr. Josiah Brown. I did exactly as you told me. I locked every door on the inside and awaited developments. And then more from Beppo. He glared at us from the shadow of his matted hair. And once, when my hand seemed within his reach, he snapped at it like a hungry wolf. I mean, he's really pulling out all the stops. The savage and animal Beppo is. And usually at this point in a Holmes story, what we get is then the criminal telling, like them interviewing the criminal, and not this time. This time he's just taken away. Lestrade's pretty happy. You'll find my theory of the mafia will work out all right, but I'm exceedingly obliged to you, Mr. Holmes, for the workmanlike way in which you laid hands upon him. I don't quite understand it all yet. So, and Holmes says tomorrow. Then okay, so then he does have time. There's a bit of a time for him to. I thought the same night, but it's not. So then he would send the letter to Reading to get the other guy in. Holmes says there's one or two details which are not finished off. That it's he always has to have these final little details. It's not enough for Holmes to settle a case, caught the criminal, found, it's well, and obviously now, because he knows that he highly suspects that this Black Pearl of Borgia is in one of the busts, and he has to get to the end of this.
I think he has to solve certain bits of the problem, but not necessarily all of them. And you even get a hint of it here. So sometimes, as long as he's understood how the crime was committed, then he thinks it's job done. He's less interested in sometimes the motivation and why it happened. And even when we get here to him theorizing about why this happened and what the connection was, it's kind of like, yeah, but it could be this, it could be that. But actually, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because, I found how the pearl got where it was and we've got it back. And I think Clausen's done a lot of stuff on that. He talks about how, there's a point at which for Holmes, the mystery is over. Conan Doyle almost imagines that for the reader, we think it's over as well at that point. But actually, there's more to this story, which is untold and actually often never explored.
Yeah. I do want to backtrack a little bit because I also wanted to share that Door Steele illustration of this. It's on the PDF of the Colliers I shared, but it's very dark on that. They're too dark, and I found this online, which shows up a little better. But here they are with him cuffed, and they're hauling him away.
He's finally able to get a drag on a cigarette.
Yeah, now I can finally smoke now that this is over. But it's not Holmes. It's William Gillette. as Sherlock Holmes, deer stalker and all. Because this is now the iconography of Sherlock Holmes. You know, the tweed, the deer stalker, which only in the story it doesn't even show up by name, but it's the outdoor, you know, ear flap hat that he wears, but only in the country, and he'll wear it. And Paget only puts it in illustrations where he's out in the countryside. He wouldn't show it him putting his deer stalker on to go to Chiswick.
No.
But this is what people, especially in America now, expect Holmes to look like. And we know that Doyle Steele really models his Holmes after William Gillette.
That's drawn from a publicity photo.
That's from the film, isn't it? That's the Stepney Gasworks.
He's literally just taken a photo of Gillette or an illustration of Gillette and then redone it and placed it in this scene here. I love the cigarette. It's the, you know, it's the post-coital we've caught the cigarette, you know. And here's the shards of the bust here. So, all righty. That is how the original audience is seeing this. The Holmes on their first reading.
When he tells Lestrade to come back the following day, I think he says, I think I shall be able to show you that even now you've not grasped the entire meaning of this business, which presents some features which make it absolutely original in the history of crime, when in fact it is the blue carbuncle. Oh, a different way.
Oh, continue that though, because then he says something else, right? He continues that. This is the permission.
Yeah. If ever I permit you to chronicle any more of my little problems, Watson, I foresee that you will enliven your pages by an account of the singular adventure of the Napoleonic busts. Fortunately, Watson comes up with a better title.
Yes.
He does, but you know, but it's also that he's authorizing Watson to use this case if he allows him to continue to print his memoirs, which is like how this whole Return series started. Yeah. He disappears for 3 years, but it's years later that Watson then starts contributing to the stories, his memoirs again. So, and he writes in one of those, I don't know if it's Empty House or just after that, where he even mentions that Holmes says that, you know, I can now start to do it. I can start publishing these cases again. So then Lestrade comes back the next night and says his name, it appeared, was Beppo. Well, yeah, I know. No mention at all. Like it's almost, and it's written. It's written as if like we're sharing, like the reader's learning this. Like we know this. Holmes never told him that. Oh, I found that out a long time ago, which is usually what happens. Usually, like they would catch him, and Holmes would turn him over, and Holmes would go, "Mr. Lestrade, let me introduce you to, you know, Signor Beppo." Like, but he skips that moment, and I almost think that. Is he just being nice? Is he not showing up Lestrade at a moment that he could have showed him up? Like, of course I know his name's Beppo. I found that out a long time ago because I stole the photo and I was able to show it around the people. But he doesn't do that here. And I think it speaks to this relationship at this point, or at least it does in this story, definitely. He has more info about him. He's a skillful sculptor, but he's taken the evil courses. He's been twice in jail, petty theft, and then the stabbing of a fellow countryman. And he was knifed, and he also stabbed. So it's not murder, and that's why he's out already. So he didn't murder somebody, or he wouldn't have been out of jail so quickly. And he could talk English perfectly well. Ooh, for a savage.
We get that. I was thinking that with the newspaper thing where Holmes is putting in the false trail, that indicates that he believes that Beppo has got a good command of English and is literate.
Yeah. It says Holmes listened with polite attention, but I, who knew him so well, could clearly see that his thoughts were elsewhere, and I detected a mixture of mingled uneasiness and expectation beneath that mask which he was wont to assume. that nice personal, observation from Watson, that he can read his friend because he knows him so well. And then Mr. Sandford of Reading appears. He's got a copy of Devine's Napoleon, and there is no Devine. Like this wasn't a particular bust that Doyle had in mind, or was it? Do we know?
Well, there's no divine as spelt divine.
Yes.
There is a divine.
Yeah, Devine. Yeah.
So he might be getting confused with Devine, and Devine was a sculptor, but I think it was Belgian, I think. But anyway, yeah.
Did he have a particularly well-known bust of Napoleon?
I don't think so.
No, I don't think he did, though.
And I don't think, or we don't know, but I've certainly seen no reference to Doyle having a bust of Napoleon himself. He had one of Sherlock Holmes, he had one of Brigadier Gerard. So I think it is a kind of just a standard idea. And that's why, I mean, you probably come back to it's quite odd with the Frederick Doyle Steel with the bust being younger Napoleon, because most of them would be like these behind me, and it's the hat.
Yeah, it's the hat that becomes the part of the iconography of Napoleon.
Yeah.
But for the people in the 19th century, this is still the Napoleon. But this is Doyle Steel is, this is in America. I'm a little surprised that this is the image that he uses of him. So I wonder if this is just, maybe Doyle Steel had one.
Yeah.
And used it for his story. Because it's there. Here it is again. This is taken from the title, piece on the front too. So this is the one that he's got it, that Doyle Steel had in mind. So more of the Napoleon for the oh, there you go.
There you go.
Curious if we could see that.
I definitely think Napoleon deserves a hat.
Yeah, because the Romantics in the early 20th century, because they were, kind of, rebellious iconoclasts of their own. I'm thinking of the Shelley, Byron crowd. They all love Napoleon, and that's the kind of image that, they would have, been more attracted to, I think, than the full military gear with the hat on.
Well, it's the difference, as saying earlier, with Morse Hudson's approach to this. The Napoleon he'll be thinking of is the military leader, whereas, say, the Napoleon started his career as this revolutionary and nationalist sort of character, who is the image that Doyle Steele's using here.
Yeah. Well, Holmes, it's nice that what's his name, Sandford says, I only paid 15 shillings, and you're giving me that's nice of him. So I'm sure the scruple does you honor, Mr. Sandford. And then he makes Sandford sign a paper in the presence of these witnesses, that you transfer every possible right that you ever had in the bust to me. I'm a methodical man, you see, and you never know what turn of events might take afterwards. Holmes is being really careful about the possession of this object that he is about to destroy, because he knows the pearl is in it now. The pearl must be in it. And that'll be a question at the very end of the story that I don't want to raise yet.
Although that would be possession of stolen goods, so you can't own it on a witnessed letter anyway. He's buying the bust. The contents, because you can't have the contents.
Maybe it's to protect Sandford, right?
Yeah, so, let's put it that way.
Yeah, there you go.
Nice, Mr. Sandford.
And it's interesting that we don't we see that picture from Doyle Steel. Paget doesn't show it. And what's fascinating too is that this is the first time these characters have seen the bust, because everyone they've seen has been shattered. They haven't actually seen one together yet. So Holmes smashes it with the hunting crop, and then he holds up a splinter in which a round dark object was fixed like a plum in a goose's crop. Oh, a pudding. I'm sorry, I'll put it says. And it is the famous Black Pearl of the Borgias. And this great moment. You want to read this? Do you have this in front of you? Lestrade and I sat
Oh
silent.
yeah, Lestrade and I sat silent for a moment, and then, with a spontaneous impulse, we both broke out clapping, as at the well-wrought crisis of a play. A flush of colour sprang to Holmes's pale cheeks, and he bowed to us like the master dramatist who receives the homage of his audience. It was at such moments that for an instant he ceased to be a reasoning machine and betrayed his human love for admiration and applause. The same singularly proud and reserved nature which turned away with disdain from popular notoriety was capable of being moved to its depths by spontaneous wonder and praise from a friend.
Very, very personal touch.
Yeah,
This
lovely stuff.
story. This is a story that really brings home this relationship that not only Holmes has with Watson, but here you also get Lestrade in there, and that whole relationship changes. But there's, these humanizing moments happen in this story that are that Watson even mentions. It's like it's not the usual Sherlock that we see. It's not the reasoning machine. This is also Sherlock.
And taking the bow, which is
The whole theatrical. It was a performance. We've
it's
seen
magic
many
trick.
times. Holmes loves giving the performance, but here this seems like just so genuinely, like they're really like, oh my gosh, we love you.
This is a fanboy moment.
Yeah. They've become the fanboys, but Watson's also so close with him here that he can read this stuff in Holmes and how Holmes is reacting as well to it, the flush of color and all of that. Well, Holmes now explains, the pearl connected by a chain of inductive reasoning. I'm surprised Doyle uses inductive there because it's always deductive with Holmes, and people sometimes criticize the stories and they're like, it's not really deductive, it's really inductive reasoning that he uses. Maybe he was criticized for it by someone and he did that himself. But inductive reasoning for people, inductive is when you form theories from specific observations, which is frequently what Holmes does. Deductive, though, actually Holmes does this too, though. Deductive is when you form specific conclusions from general premises. And Holmes does this too, because he knows about criminals and the way they think or criminal history. So he does do that as well. But the inductive is the usual method that's going on. And that's certainly what's happened here in this story, I think. I'm no master of logic here, people, though. Don't confuse that. Me knowing a couple terms that I probably only know because I read Sherlock Holmes stories. There was the jewel disappeared. Holmes himself was consulted upon the case. So technically, this is one of the unrecorded cases that we didn't know was unrecorded until this case. So Holmes was apparently consulted about the theft of the Borgia pearl and bought every goose in London and didn't find it.
Well, I mean, this is because this is the same setup. The Prince of Colonna's bedroom raided at the Dacre Hotel.
Yeah.
And in the Blue Carbuncle, it's left unclear as to the role of the maid. But here the maid is entirely complicit.
Yeah.
She helped smuggle this out, and she's known.
Yeah. She's Venucci's sister.
Pietro's sister.
So either they were so what we wind up was with either Beppo, and Holmes talks about this, either Beppo was involved in the theft with him and then wound up with the pearl and then hid it and went to prison, or he knew about it and he stole it from Pietro. We don't know, like, their connection, why they were at odds at that point. We don't know. Or maybe he was put off. Maybe Beppo was put on the hunt for it, and then when Pietro shows up, he kills him, thinking like, I'm just going to keep it for myself now. Like, he's getting rid of his partner.
There's another literary connection making in here as well. Mark's just mentioned there with the Prince of Colonna. And in 1898, in Pearson's magazine, there was a wonderful series of stories which nobody seems to have heard of. It's fantastic. It's called The Last of the Borgias. And it's about a character called Professor Colonna, Professor Victor Colonna, I think it is. And he has in his possession Lucrezia Borgia's own book of poisons. And he's almost a poisoner for hire. And there's just a short series of these stories. It was the second half of 1898. And from The Prince of Colonna and the Borgia Pearl, I suspect that Doyle had actually read these. And again, it's a little tip of the hat to Fred M. White, who wrote those stories. But they are great. If you can get a hold of old Pearson's, I recommend them to anyone.
Pearson's they were in? Yeah.
Pearson's, yeah, in the second half of 1898.
He should be in the Bond films. Colonna as a poisoner for hire. I do like, I mean, it's topical, isn't it, as well, that we're talking about the Borgias, because of course the two most famous Borgias are Cesare Borgia was the model for Machiavelli's The Prince, and his sister was Lucrezia, who was famed as a poisoner, although that's almost certainly exaggerated. Dear old Victor Hugo did a lovely play about it in the 1830s as well. But their father was Rodrigo Borgia, who was Pope Alexander VI. So, little, topical with our most recent change in Vatican City. Except, let's hope the new one is nowhere anything like
He's definitely not a Borgia.
Because Alexander VI was not a good pope.
Yeah. But you got to be suspicious of the Americans in the Vatican. So. Yeah, and so thanks for that connection, Paul, because Doyle finding these things and inserting them into it also speaks to what you had mentioned very early today, Marcus, that Doyle having, like, he has to come up with these ideas for these home stories, and they have to be interesting, and the well is going to run dry at some point. Now, the most masterful writer in the world, you have to come up with these inventive ideas, and then on top of that, add all these other details into, on top of that, create an interesting narrative. Doyle never is going to not be able to do the narrative part. It's the finding all the details, things to add to it, and here we've gone to the Borgias and these Italian conspiracies. Towards the end of this paragraph, he says, then with the help of some Italian employee, he succeeded. And it's just that word employee is still sometimes and frequently being used as a foreign borrowing, even up to 1904 when the story is published. Employee isn't standard yet. You'll see employee, but not everywhere. It's also used in Red-Headed League, employee, as the French spelling of the word. Yeah. Although only in the Strand, I think in the book editions it gets modernized to employee. But again, it's a word. It's again tying these characters to being foreigners. They're not English. They are, designated by foreign words. Holmes says it was Lestrade asked why did he need his photo if he knew him? Well, he was going to ask people who he was, like I did. He doesn't say that. And then he says, he had to find the bust in one of these. I was still hoping it was going to be in one of the last two. Catch him. And Holmes, it's evident that he was looking for something in the busts, and so that's why I searched for the busts instead of who murdered this person, because then I would find him anyway.
And there's that bit there which is going to the point he was making earlier about the fact that he's, once he knows the technicalities of how the pearl was stolen, he's not that interested in the motivation. So he says, Beppo may have stolen it from Pietro, who may have been Pietro's confederate. He may have been the go-between of Pietro and his sister. It is of no consequence to us which is the correct solution.
That is a little surprising, because that's what he would have asked Beppo had they gotten the interview.
Yeah.
You know, this is the information that Holmes usually likes to get at the end of a story. You know, like Jonathan Small. Oh, so that's where the rope came from. You brought the rope. Like, who cares who brought the rope? Um, but you know, he likes to tie all the loose ends up, and he doesn't tie all the loose ends up here.
No, and when Granada have to adapt it, they have to. So what they do is they make Beppo the cutout
Whole
between
story,
Pietro
yeah.
and
Yeah.
Lucrezia, who of course is played by Marina Sirtis.
Star Trek connection.
Goes on to spend 7 years saying, "I'm sensing nothing, Captain," in Star Trek: The Next Generation.
And she also in the Raffles series from 1977 with she plays Faustina in
She does.
in the Raffles Camorra story. So
Well
connections
done.
again.
Wow, how about that?
There we go.
Paul, do you have the story with you right there? Yeah.
No,
You're good. If you don't, that's fine. I'm gonna have Mark read the end of this.
yeah. If
What
you just add up,
illustration.
Max, I'd just yeah.
Oh, you have it? Oh, just
I have it, but I'd have to dig about.
Okay.
If Mark's got it ready,
I've got it. Which bit do you want?
We sat in silence for a moment and then read the whole ending.
Yeah. Well, said Lestrade, I've seen you handle a good many cases, Mr. Holmes, but I don't know that I ever saw a more workmanlike one than that. We're not jealous of you at Scotland Yard. No, sir, we're very proud of you. And if you come down tomorrow, there's not a man from the oldest inspector to the youngest constable who wouldn't be glad to shake you by the hand. Thank you, said Holmes. Thank you. And as he turned away, it seemed to me that he was more nearly moved by the softer human emotions than I had ever seen him. And Brett does that brilliantly, doesn't he, as well? That moment is terrific in the Granada series. I've just ruined Colin Jeavons' performance. Colin Jeavons does it very well too.
Just as a side note, very proud of you is Strand. Damned proud of you is Collier's, because Collier's takes from the manuscript and the Strand corrects, you know, those words. So the Strand takes out damned and puts very, and Collier's, you could see it as damned proud. We're damned proud. And then a moment later, he was the cold and practical thinker once more. Watson adds that, you know, this is, but we have this very emotional moment that usually, and this is a whole turnaround from the relationship with the police here, isn't it? You know, I mean, they're supposed to be the bumbling fools who hate you, who you constantly show up. And here's Lestrade admitting that we're very proud of you. And this is almost the moment for me when that like thing happens where a hero or sometimes even a villain has been established in a certain way, and that they become so popular, everybody has to like them in a sense. Like everything about them has to be good. And that might be what's going on here, kind of thing. That the police aren't bad either. And Doyle himself is really starting to really look at criminal cases and being interested in court cases and criminology and things. So he'll really get involved later, but I think it's even by now he's starting to be interested in this stuff. When did you say he becomes friends with
well, Anderson, who is the police commissioner, and he's police commissioner during the Ripper investigation, I think. He writes an article called Sherlock Holmes as Seen by Scotland Yard in August or September 1903. So around the time that he's writing it. Now, his relationship with Scotland Yard is not going to be always great, because later he gets, when he's doing the George Edelgy case, he has a really hot-tempered exchanges with Police Commissioner Anson, who basically Conan Doyle accuses of racism, and on very good grounds, it has to be said. So the relationship is always up and down. But it is interesting that this comes in, you know, around the time he was writing this, may well have been the time that this article popped out in the Police Weekly.
And he also has going back a while, sort of 10 years before this, is where his friendship with Major Arthur Griffith.
Yeah.
who's involved with the police and the army. And he'd been prison governor and so on. So Doyle was also friendly with him. And I think it was through him that Doyle got to see the Black Museum. And got
Yes.
to see the original, the Dear Boss letter and so on. So he's always had this connection. But as you say, it's going to become more and more into the early 20th century as he then gets involved in things like the Adelgy case and the Slater case and becomes more and more personally involved with criminal cases himself.
Mm-hmm.
Joins the Crimes Club. I think he's a member of the Crimes
Yes,
Club
he
around
is,
this
yeah.
time, isn't he?
Mm.
Well, now let's put the pearl in the safe, Watson, and get out the papers of the Conk Singleton forgery case. Goodbye. If anything comes your way, let me know.
Put it next to the blue carbuncle. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
this
does he keep the pearl?
he's got a
No.
police officer. He's got a police officer in the room who's letting him put it in his own safe. It does baffle me.
Obviously, he'll then. Well, I say obviously. It maybe you can assume that he will restore it to the family owners, but and he could get a reward for it, obviously too. So if he wants to kind of keep financing his ability to do these things for people who don't have any money, like all the money he took from the Duke of Holderness in the solitary cyclist case. So not solitary cyclist, the Priory School. Sure, yeah, give me all. Oh yeah, double it. Yeah, that's good. I'll take that. But I don't know. Pearl's in the safe for now. That's all we know.
Yeah.
Well, that was wonderful, gentlemen. Anything to add to wrap it up? I'm just amazed at the kind of personal touches that Holmes's humanity and his connections with Watson, and this is. I know it's a kind of redo of the kind of basics of Blue Carbuncle, but
Feels different though, doesn't it?
It does, and it's exceptionally well written.
It is.
This is a really fine story. This is one of those that I think frequently does show up in people's top 10 stories and should. This one works all the way through, and we even get like Holmes summations in it that usually reserves from telling us until the end. Like that not that we really can piece it together because we know nothing about the pearl or not, but you'd still have to make the leap that there's something in a bust. And maybe you could. And some people were asking that in the chat earlier, did anybody think there was something in them? You could make that connection as Holmes did. But he doesn't seem to hold back as much in this story. We get to go through it with him and see things. He's not going out in disguise and discovering something and we don't learn about it until later, right?
No, the only instant of that is that he sends the letters to tell Brown to be prepared and that stuff. But really, everything is in the story that allows you to work out that something is in these busts, and there's something that connects them, and one person is after them, and the confusing factor is Pietro, and so actually it's a very skillful piece of writing. And as much as we've drawn out, as you said, Ed, the connections to the Blue Carbuncle, this feels incredibly fresh.
Yeah,
this really does. This is not like the Stockbroker's Clerk as a rehashing of the Red-Headed League, or even the Three Garradebs as a rehashing of the Red-Headed League, where you can sort of see the mechanics a bit more obviously. In this one, it actually feels like a new story. And I also think it is so well written that it goes back to something that we've said previously. I think Ross and I said in the Norwood Builder one that, the Return gets a really bad rap. But actually, some of the writing in here is terrific. I would put this among, the Adventures and Memoirs easily.
Yeah.
As one of the best stories.
Well, The Return is my favorite collection.
Yeah.
Definitely.
They're particularly strong stories in The Return.
Well, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say the things. I mean, to come back to Napoleon just before there's a couple of
Let's
points.
get back to the man with all the butt. Yeah.
Yes, I have
Napoleon.
I have to finish with Napoleon. Is too that it interests me that this time Doyle uses Napoleon in a Sherlock Holmes story, and his head is still in the Napoleonic world through Gerard and the other stories that he's written. He hasn't exercised Napoleon from his system, and he's put him in here. And the other thing which has struck me while we're going through this, which I should really have mentioned earlier, is the thing that Napoleon's own background. He's Italian rather than French. With his Corsican background. And there was one point in, I think it's Through the Magic Door, I can't remember the exact quote, but Doyle's essentially saying that Napoleon in many ways had the soul of an Italian bandit. And I think this is why the Napoleon bust fits so well with being a story of Italian gangs and so on. And it just, from what you're saying earlier as well, the gangs element, it feels modern. It feels very modern, this story, and it rips along at a fair old pace. It's just great.
Good. Yeah. Well, thank you for going on this biblioventure with me, guys. Coming up next month, we will return to talk about the adventure of the three students with my previous Sherlock Mondays co-host Curtis Armstrong finally returning. I'm very happy about that. And the fabulous Rebecca Romney will be on the show. She'll take some time off from all the work she does selling books and promoting her own book on Jane Austen's bookshelf to come and talk some Sherlock with us. That'll be a lot of fun. And then after next show, I'm going to take a little break for a couple months, and then we'll return in the fall with the next story in the chronological order, the Golden Pince, the Golden Pince Nez. But we have one more to go. 3 students with Curtis and Rebecca. Definitely, you don't want to miss that one. As good as these guys are, you don't want to miss Curtis and Rebecca together. That's going to be fabulous. Can't wait to talk to them with a story. You guys are great. Thank you. Thank you to the sponsor, Sherlock Monthly, Lisa Washington. We couldn't do these shows without the generous support of our patrons. You also can support the Rosenbach through donation. Your support helps us create more programs like this and care for our collections. You could also become a member. Membership gives you early access and discounts to programs and courses. You can find out more at our website, rosenbach.org. Again, let me remind you to subscribe to our channel, to like these videos. Mark, Paul, thanks again. I'll see you guys. Hang on, and I'll play the video, and then I'll come back to you. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library, where the game is a book. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.